Hi, welcome to the code walkthrough for Flixie, which is the first homework assignment of the Coder School React and React Native class. So today I'm just going to go through the first few steps for our week 1 homework assignment. It's to build a movie browser using the Movie Database API. And in this walkthrough, we'll go through the basics of setting up your React components and also loading from the API. So to get started, I just typed create React app. I'm calling it Flixie. And when you hit yarn start, I'm already running it, sorry. You should see the very familiar screen, which is welcome to React. So here I'll just do the first thing I always do, which is make sure things are still working. So welcome to Flixie. Hooray. I also don't like this logo, so I made one myself before this, and I'll copy it. And I'll import it here. Sorry, I called it Flixie logo. Yay. I really don't like this spin. It's weird. So where is that spin coming from? It's actually coming from app.css. So under app logo, there's animation. Now, we'll talk more about CSS in a minute, but kind of the way that for this class I'll recommend you do CSS is exactly like this, which is you have a CSS file per component, and you preface each class with the name of the component. Anyway, so now the annoying spin is gone. Alright, now we want to show some movies. So we're going to have to define a few new components. Along the way, actually, I'm going to need some styling. So I'm going to add two packages, which are Bloomer and Bulma. These are just CSS libraries, a little bit like Bootstrap if you've used that. I just like Bloomer because it's optimized for React, and you'll see what I mean. So we can just do import container from Bloomer. And we can do things like define top-level components. Now, you can read documentation about Bloomer at bloomer.js.org. But the one thing missing from that documentation on how to install it is that you have to also import the CSS for Bulma. So we're going to do that here. You only need to do this in the main file, app.js, or one time somewhere. So now we have a little bit of container setup. Our fonts are a little bit different. And so let's replace this. Get started with container. And let's put our movie list in here. Movies list. Now we need to import this new component. Sorry, no quotes there. And we're going to get an error here because we haven't made that component yet. So let's do that. So I'd like to call things, this is a personal thing, I like to use JSX. You don't have to use JSX. But I just like doing that to remind myself that I'm writing React code. Actually, let me close that. Sorry, my browser was in a bit of a... There you go. Okay, movies list.jsx. So we don't have anything here, so we need to import React components, class app, extends component. I have a hard time remembering all these things, so one thing I've done is install an extension for Visual Code called React Redux React Router Snippets. There are a few different ones of these. You can just search for React here, and you'll get a lot. I just like this one by Disk Country. So these snippets, what they let us do is type in shortcuts that expand into component classes. So I'm about to sneeze, hold on. That went away. And that way I don't have to remember all the different boilerplate around import and extends component and those things. The other thing I just did was, very fast, I did Command-Shift-P, format document. This is something I also do pretty obsessively. That's also from an extension that I have installed called Prettier. And it just makes your code very, very pretty. And you want pretty code because you are a good engineer. In movies list, for now, let's just return movies list to make sure everything is working fine. It is coming through. Now, let's show the actual movies. So in our homework, we have this API that you should use. It's called the Movie Database API. Very creative name. But it has lots of cool endpoints. But when I get started doing an application, I like to save data and load locally. So because there could be things going wrong, like you're not fetching the data correctly or something, I like to just make it simple. So let's just copy this raw JSON into a local file and load that to begin. Once that's working, then we'll go and actually load it from the API like we're supposed to. So let's call this test.json. Save it, and then here I'll just import test data from test.json. If you look at the format of the data, it's all wrapped in a big results block. That's where our movies are. So when we use test data, we should do dot results. So let movies equal test data results. And we'll pass this as a prop into movies list. Now here, instead of, we'll do this.props.movies.map. So for every movie in this.props.movies, we'll return a movie card. What is movie card? I'm glad you asked because we haven't made it yet. Okay. Error about no such thing as movie card. Let's make a movie card. I'll use my snippet to make it super fast. And then here we'll just return movie.title. It's not movie.title, it's .props.movie.title. And boom, we have all the movies from this JSON loading correctly. This is very exciting, except maybe we can make this a little bit more beautiful. So that's where Bloomer comes to the rescue. Let's import box from Bloomer. And we'll return this h1 with a box. Great, we have super cool boxes now. Maybe this wasn't as beautiful as you expected. You thought it would look a lot better. Well, let's do that. So I mentioned earlier that there's a few different ways to style components in React. I'm going to recommend that we just do per component CSS file. So you make a new CSS file for each component. So let's do movie card CSS. And you just define CSS rules in this file. Now CSS is always global, so this will all compile into one big CSS file which will be served with the application. So it's just kind of good practice to namespace it the kind of ghetto manual way. So we'll start every class name with the name of our component, and that way they won't ever fight with each other. Movie card, we'll call this movie card box. Let's call it movie card box. And movie card box. And here we can do whatever we want to make this very beautiful. I'm going to start with the background color to be light cyan. Ha! And then we have now what I think you will say is the most beautiful app you've ever seen in your life. So, I mean, for your homework, please spend a little bit more time on the styling here. You can, of course, also you'll be showing the film poster and the overview details and things like that as well. But in this video, I'll skip all that stuff because I'm really excited to show you how to load data from the API directly. So right now, we're still loading from test data. So just to give you a quick recap, we loaded data from test data. We pass that in to movies list, and then movies list takes each item in that and makes a movie card out of it. Now, let's get rid of this test data. We're going to load data from the API directly, and to do that, we're going to do that. We'll call a function called component did mount. So there are a few different lifecycle methods in React. So you saw that every component has a render function. This is very required for every component. You have to implement render. There's no way around that. But there's a couple other methods that if you define them, they will get called. So in particular, the one you use most commonly is component did mount. And this is where you do all your API calls and such, because this is called once the component is really initialized. So component did mount will do fetch. So fetch is the way that you make kind of these AJAX requests in JavaScript. So we will do. So another thing too is I'm going to use this await syntax. If you're not familiar with this, it's just a different way to make programming asynchronous operations very simple. So if you need more help on this, there's a whole bunch of posts online, including one written by the Coder School teacher, Jiren Chen, about async await. And that's linked. I'll link that somewhere in the video. So we're going to await the fetching of the sample request. So we're going to, one quick note, when you use await, you need to mark your function as async. So we're going to await the results of this API call. We're going to await processing it and parsing it to JSON, and then we're going to set state. We'll set a new state variable called movies, and we'll do it to this movie. Now, this might be a little bit confusing why I'm saving this here. Later, as you use your homework, you'll see why. Because as we may filter the movie results, we'll probably want a handle to the first initial API call, which is why I save it as this.movies. But to be clear, this.setState, this is what will make the render function re-render itself. The component only cares about what's in this.setState, or sorry, this.state. And now instead of this.movies, we can leave this.state. Huh. So it doesn't like this. It says cannot read property movies of null. Oh, it's because it's saying that this.state is null. So when you use this and you introduce state to components, you need to define a constructor. And in that constructor, you will initialize the state variable. So we'll initialize it to empty array. And now we're back. Now, I'm not fully convinced this is working because it looks exactly like how it did before in the test data. So let me just do a quick thing to prove to myself this is working. I'm going to write a function called sleep. Don't worry about what this function does, but this just makes the app wait for a number of milliseconds. So here we'll say await sleep, let's say 4,000. Oops, this dot sleep. So now we'll wait 4 seconds so I can see that's actually loading data. In the homework assignment, I also ask you to do a quick notice the user if you're loading API results. So most apps, instead of showing a blank page, will be like, hey, please wait, I'm loading right now. So let's do that. As with all things I'm doing today, you can make it more beautiful aesthetically, but I'll try to focus on making it as beautiful from a code standpoint as I can. So we're going to do this. Let movies, let content equals. So this is pretty cool about JSX. So now we can actually assign variables to like these tags. So this content variable now contains the movies list or the loading text here. And then we can just display the content. So this is one of the ways to do what's called conditional rendering. This is very common in React to do kind of if statements and render different things. For example, if you're loading, show a loading bar. If you're logged in, show a log out button. If you're logged out, show a log in button. And assigning variables this way is one of the cleaner ways to do it. There are a few other ways you can do this, but I would say you can't really go wrong with this. But the one way we did go wrong is we need to find this loading. So we'll start off with when we first open the page, loading will be true. And after we load the movies, we'll set loading to false. So now for the first 4 seconds, we see a loading text, and boom, the API results page in. Pretty neat, huh? So that's the first part of the homework assignment, and hopefully this gets you through showing all the movies and loading from the API.